Good morning. It's Alan Bird again. I'm here to go into our next exhibit. Very thankful for the comments that we had on the first one. We're going to continue to methodically, line by line, and exhibit by exhibit, publish this information. Again, with as much empathy and understanding and patience as we can. I was thinking about the scripture that said that my people perish for lack of knowledge. And that scripture is so true now, because there is so much knowledge that we didn't know. It's a lot of knowledge that I knew, but I didn't know as well, even as a cosmetic chemist. So this was needed. This had to be done. This information needed to be out here. And as we continue to go exhibit by exhibit, you will come to the same conclusion that I did. I believe that this information needs to be out there for the greater good and for the truth to really be told. So we're going to go into our next exhibit, Exhibit B. I call this From Urban Myth to Mandate. The genesis of the dangerous relaxer claims can be traced back to a persistent urban myth circulating in the beauty salons in the early 2000s, just after I got into the industry. This myth claimed that chemical relaxers could seep through the scalp and enter into the bloodstream, causing death and disease. Stories spread, including the oft-repeated tale of a woman whose autopsy allegedly revealed relaxer cream under her scalp. I still remember going to a salon talking about that. The myth gained momentum and was spread through salons and blogs before there was social media. I remember some blogs were mostly, blogs that were really anti-relaxer that was pushing this myth that this lady had died and they pulled her scalp back and that there was like relaxer underneath. And I was like, that can't do that. It's not even possible. But it was a myth, urban myth, and it went around and it just started the whole cultural phenomenon that relaxers were bad. The turning point for public perception, however, of relaxers can be traced back to the cultural zeitgeist in the late 2000s, when comedian Chris Rock released the 2009 documentary Good Hair. Y'all remember that one, right? This film still to this day did more damage to the black hair industry than any outside firm could ever have done, in my opinion, because it was marketed as a cultural celebration documentary that came from within the culture. The film started out with scenes of the Bronner Brothers show, the one I talked about earlier, interviews with industry leaders and hairstylists, which seemed celebratory. Still, the film, contains some humor and with shocking imagery, leaving an indelible impression. One of its most notorious scenes, I know you guys remember this one, involved a supposed scientist placing an aluminum Coke can into a jar of concentrated sodium hydroxide, the active ingredient in many relaxers.
This is an aluminum soft drink can, and it's been in sodium hydroxide for just over an hour. Another aluminum soft drink can that's been in for about 3 hours, and then this one has been in for about 4 hours. It has disintegrated.
So that can's got a good perm.
That can's got a good perm.
Before the camera, the can dissolved in a caustic solution, a vivid visual that powerfully reinforced the notion that relaxers were not just strong, but dangerously corrosive. While sodium hydroxide at such concentrations is indeed caustic, the staged demonstration was deeply misleading. Relaxer formulations are emulsified, buffered, and controlled for cosmetic use, with only 1.4% to 1.2% of the active ingredient, not the 100% raw and industrial chemical portrayed in the film. Nevertheless, the visual shorthand that relaxers could eat through metal cemented a corrosive narrative in the public imagination. When paired with Chris Rock's outhanded comment, "Black women use this on their hair," and a response from the gentleman conducting the experiment questioned who uses this, the imagery lent a veneer of scientific credibility to what was effectively an urban myth. The corrosive metaphor became the cultural bedrock for the term creamy crack. However, the most disappointing revelation looking back at the damage this film has done to our culture and the hair industry was the fact that Chris Rock, and I wish he had not done this, before this notorious experiment in the scene before was given a tour of Dudley's manufacturing facility. He was interviewing actual cosmetic chemists and employees who were making hair care products as they spoke. They could have explained how relaxers are made and why they were safe to use when properly applied. But Mr. Rock chose not to ask them. At least it wasn't shown on the documentary. They could have given him a relaxer to do his aluminum Coke can experiment. Even more practically, Mr. Rock could have conducted the experiment right there in a facility with the chemists who formulated the relaxers. But he didn't. Why not? It must be clearly understood how deliberate that it looked. Chris Rock would have had to go to a hardware store or raw chemical store to purchase 100% sodium hydroxide, or Drano for that matter, to conduct his publicity stunt. Because no beauty supply store on earth sells pure sodium hydroxide or Drano, as no hardware store or raw material chemical store sells relaxers. In reality, Chris Rock's 2009 documentary Good Hair famously amplified the creamy crack narrative, which stigmatized the consumers as addicts and the stylists who provided these services as drug dealers, cementing relaxers as both culturally suspect and scientifically dangerous in the public imagination. The result was a perfect storm where antidote and fear evolved into academic hypothesis. This hypothesis, the burn gateway, it can soak through the skin, right? That was the big thing. If you put it on your hair, it can soak through the skin and give you cancer or just be dangerous to you. Academics advanced this hypothesis that scalp burns from relaxers provided a pathway for systemic absorption of endocrine disrupting chemicals, EDCs. This burn hypothesis was not based on toxicological evidence, but instead on assumption. Dermatological commentaries and generalized textbooks were often cited, but none were toxicology reports on relaxers themselves. Nonetheless, the theory was repeated so frequently that it was accepted as scientific possibility, laying the groundwork for later epidemiology. And that's the thing. I did some further research, and the original desire to test relaxers as a potential carcinogen deliverer was initially rejected because it's an intermediate product that's rinsed off. It doesn't stay on the skin. In order for you to have any kind of burns or systemic absorption, it had to stay on there for extended amounts of time. We're talking about days, not just minutes, especially if it's only minutes and it's rinsed off. So initially there was a pushback on that. But I did find through my research that, again, the twist was you're not looking out for Black women, so you're not going to allow us to explore this particular avenue or hypothesis. And they relented. So they went down this path of systemic absorption from a 20 to 25 minute intermittent application that only was done 4 times a year. In parallel with the scalp burn hypothesis, relaxers became entangled in a broader scientific pursuit, the search for environmental contaminants that might contribute to breast cancer risk. A number of epidemiology studies in the early 2000s and 10s tested a wide range of hair products, dyes, sprays, gels, and conditioners under the rubric of potential exposure. Relaxers were sequenced into this category not because of toxicological data singling them out, but because they were cosmetically relevant products already used by large cohorts of Black women. This broadened scope subtly shifted the research trajectory. Relaxers, though producing no distinctive toxicological signal, because relaxers are sodium hydroxide, calcium hydroxide, those are considered non-carcinogenic, were nevertheless treated as if they carried the same speculative risk profile as unrelated products. This category drift metastasized the original hypothesis. Instead of being retired when empirical evidence showed no association with burns or absorption, relaxers were perpetually kept on the table simply because they appeared in the same exposure inventories as other products. In effect, relaxers were guilty by association, sequenced into cancer narrative through inclusion of omnibus project surveys rather than any direct toxicological evidence. Again, they all admit sodium hydroxide is used, is as common as ever. Calcium hydroxide is used common as ever, but they were trying to find some other things that, again, those endocrine blockers, that's where they shifted. I think they finally relented and say, oh, we know that, relaxers contain sodium hydroxide and calcium hydroxide, and we admit those are not cancerous, but it's those other things, those other endocrines, that's what could be in those relaxers. They had to have those ingredients in order for this to be where it needs to be. So there was so much talk about it could be, till we got to this point. The burn hypothesis was in fact tested by the nation's largest cohort of Black women, the Black Women's Health Study, spanning nearly 59,000 participants across decades, directly investigated the relationship between relaxer use, scalp burns, and uterine fibroids. In the 2007 publication, they reported hair relaxer use, frequency of use, duration of use, and reported scalp burns showed no material increase in uterine fibroids. Say that again. They reported in 2007, hair relaxer use, frequency of use, duration of use, and reported scalp burns showed no materially increased risk of uterine fibroids. The 2012 follow-up confirmed the same null finding. The occurrence of scalp burns, whether frequent or rare, was not associated with increased fibroid risk. Later analyses shifted terminology from relaxers to hair straighteners, but the Black Women's Health Study foundation was clear. Burns did not predict outcomes. Despite this negative evidence, subsequent NIH-backed studies recycled the burn narrative without acknowledging these definitive no results. This represents not just miscitation, but the active suppression of exonerating evidence already established in literature. I think we need to stop right here and talk about what's the purpose of these epidemiology studies. When there is a health risk and you have a suspect, then you got to basically either clear that suspect, ingredient or potential health risk, or continue down that road. Epidemiology studies are not toxicology reports. They're questionnaires, and they are prone to recall bias, which means that you got to rely on someone's memory, and then that's the evidence that you have. That's why they're designed to just as pointers and markers so that you can head down a certain path further or turn around and go another way, because we're all trying to get to the truth. What's causing the cancer? That's the bottom line answer we want to know. What's causing the cancer? And you either rule in or you rule out something. Unfortunately, in this case, based on this hypothesis, they never went to rule it out. They just kept it going and kept it going. And instead of ruling it out and going other directions, they just reinvented the name, included more types of tools, types of straightening procedures to continue this narrative. And that's where we're at. Unfortunately, because we didn't push back hard enough or didn't know all this information was in here, knowledge, we could perish. Misuse and recycling. Despite Black Women's Health findings, the NIH-sponsored studies in 2022 onward, misclassified relaxers together with keratin treatments and even non-chemical pressing tools, as I just talked about, while reviving the discarded burn hypothesis. Toxicologist papers such as Helms and Myers either found no detectable EDCs or only trace amounts. They were miscited as though they were implicating relaxers. Instead of pivoting to exonerating data, research doubled down, misrepresenting surface level dermatology references as systemic toxicology proof. This misclassification and miscitation created a scientific paper trail that was later weaponized in media narratives and multi-district litigation. We're going to talk further about Helms and Myers. That's what really make me raise my eyebrows, because Helms and Myers were actual toxicology reports. And when you see the study on the first page, when they say straighteners have been known to have endocrine blockers, they cite these two papers, Helms and Myers. Me being a researcher, business administration major, had to write a lot of research papers. And I know when you cite something, you got to go, it has to be right. So when they made that empirical statement, the first place I did was I got to go find those studies that they say validated that claim. What did I find? We'll talk about it later in other exhibits. They said the exact opposite. They literally said that the relaxers did not have the endocrine blockers in it, but the other products did. Blew me away. One of the things that had in my research on dermal absorption led me to Dr. Michelle Wong of Lab Muffin Beauty Science. She's a pharmaceutical chemist, and she does excellent research. She basically said that cosmetic ingredients are formulated to act on the surface of the skin and hair, not to penetrate into the bloodstream. She talked about how the fact that pharmaceutical grade ingredients have to be so small that they can penetrate past the epidural, down into the bloodstream. And cosmetics are designed to beautify you and to take care of the surface area. She said that the 6% absorption claim is a misinterpretation of the 1984 EPA report, which referenced an isolated small water-soluble molecule under laboratory conditions, not complex high pH relaxer formulations. Moreover, alkaline relaxers denature keratin at the hair shaft, a surface level action inconsistent with systemic absorption. As Wong notes, the claim that 6% of everything you apply on your skin enters your bloodstream is false. Cosmetic products are designed to stay on top of the skin barrier. Large charged molecules like hydroxide cannot pass through. This directly rebukes the recycle burn narrative. If hydroxides and large relaxant molecules cannot traverse intact skin, then a localized scalp burn, while painful, does not translate into systemic chemical exposure. And I believe there are several of my colleagues, even people in the industry, that have acknowledged that at this point. But there was a time when they believed it was just a relaxer in and of itself because of what it was, it penetrated. But I think most people that I've talked to lately are acknowledging that it's not the sodium hydroxide or the calcium hydroxide, it's these other ingredients. And that's where we'll spend the bulk of our debunking going forward. The trajectory is clear. An urban myth became a hypothesis. The hypothesis was tested and rejected, yet policymakers, academics, and litigants continue to recycle it. This myth has grown into a mandate, where legislation like the Crown Act frames hair choices as civil rights issues, and litigation frames relaxers as toxic despite decades of no evidence. The irony is stark. Eurocentric standards are blamed, yet the first chemical hair alteration, the permanent wave, was invented by a European to curl straight hair. Hair alteration has been practiced globally, from African clay straightening to Asian herbal rinses, long before modern relaxers. To now stigmatize relaxer users as victims of racial self-hate is both historically false and culturally harmful. This concludes my second exhibit. I look forward to the conversation, but we've got to put this narrative to rest. My next exhibit, we go even deeper into the burn hypothesis to really put it to rest once and for all.